one of the things that gets lost in the fog, I see people in that financial fog or emotional fog where they're saying, I just want it done. I could care less. I wasn't in this for the money. Well, guess what? You may not have been in it for the money, but the money can mess you up if you don't take a look at it. And I would say even more importantly, for men and women, if you care about your children, slow down a little bit and say, okay, what do I need to do? It makes all the difference in the world.
Welcome to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast. I'm your host, attorney and mediator, Cary Jacobson. Each week, we bring you practical guidance, real conversations, and expert insights to help you navigate divorce with clarity, confidence, and less conflict. If you're ready for a calmer, more empowered path forward, you're in the right place. Welcome back to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast, where we help individuals and families navigate divorce with less conflict, more clarity, and smarter decision-making. I'm your host, Cary Jacobson, attorney and mediator at Jacobson Family Law. And today I'm excited to introduce a neighbor of sorts. My guest is based right here in Silver Spring, Maryland, and the work she does complements what we do here at Jacobson Family Law in a very real, meaningful way. Joining me today is Michelle Muhammed, a certified financial planner, chartered financial consultant, and a certified divorce financial analyst. She's also the founder of two separate practices, M&M Wealth Advisory, which is her full-service wealth management firm, and The Next Chapter Divorce, which focuses exclusively on divorce financial planning, including serving as a financial neutral in mediation. Before any of that, Michelle was a senior analytic chemist at Merck. And that scientific background, the precision, the analytic rigor is something that she now brings to some of the most emotionally charged financial decisions people ever face. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Cary. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. And I have to start with your origin story because it's not what people might expect. You went from being, like I said, an analytic chemist to then becoming a certified financial planner. And now you're working with folks, in addition to that, in a CDFA role. So tell me a little bit about what kind of thread connected all of that and what ultimately drew you to working specifically with divorcing clients.
Oh, wow. Do we have all day? Well, thank you very much. I often say I could have had a lot more fun in college if I had known where I was going to end up because, chemistry is not the easiest. It's not like physics or anything like that. But still, there's definitely quite a bit of work involved. But I think it served me well in terms of being able to deconstruct certain things and put things together and really just think constructively to help people problem solve. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times, whether it's in financial planning or the finances of divorce, people are looking like, how do we get to our goal? What are the things we need to do? And so in some ways, that's like a formula. And you have to really solve for certain things. I think that my whole career has really been, to a large extent, divine intervention in the sense that there's no way this nerdy girl should have ended up in a people business, rather than in the lab or whatnot. But I do credit quite a bit of, I would say, my bedside manner to my mother, who was a physician. She was a physician and a medical professor. And, just watching her with people really helped me a lot. And to be frank, I went into the sciences like my parents before me, and I thought I would become a doctor, not an oncologist, hematologist like she was, but maybe an ENT because I had lots of sinus issues growing up and stuff like that. But I ultimately decided not to do that. And people have heard this story before, but because I didn't want to be just like my mother. I looked just like her, talk just like her, all kinds of things. And I was like, I'm going to be a rebel. And fortunately, what happened is it kind of led me on the path of I still wanted to help people. I did enjoy my work as an analytical chemist. It's very important work because I was testing the raw materials that go into medications. And as we know, we don't want the wrong proportions or wrong formulae or anything like that, or any adulteration of that kind of stuff. But that being said, it wasn't really close enough to making to the end result, to the person who you were affecting. And I'm just very fortunate that during college, I did take business classes as well as French classes. And so I had some tools. And then the perfect, like I said, divine intervention type of thing happened where I had the opportunity to work with employees of school systems and nonprofits doing their mainly retirement planning. And from there, I was trained in comprehensive financial planning. So even though it started with the retirement plan, it was about the whole picture. And that was just wonderful because I was helping those who help others who, teach kids and so on, all the way up to university professors and so on. So it's really cool, and nonprofits and so on. And as the years went on, one thing I noticed about some of my favorite clients as I evolved from working mainly with public sector and nonprofit employees and educators to working with everybody and more high net worth folks, I realized that, hey, some of my favorite clients have been through a divorce. Luckily, in a number of cases, they have remarried happily, which you and I both know statistically, that's not the case. But for whatever reason, I'm going to knock on wood. I have a bunch of clients who one or both have remarried, and it's just been they're in a really good relationship right now. But they were still dealing with the financial implications of things that happened as a result of the divorce. And by the time years and years have passed, or like the ink is dried, there's nothing I can do. I really wanted to see what I could do to help people in the decision-making process. I don't make the decisions for anybody. Just as you know, as a mediator, when you're helping people, you're not telling them what to do. You're helping them find what their decision is going to be. And for me, it's all about the education. Like, hey, here are your different options. In some cases, if I'm a neutral, it's like, just like a mediator, really give you the information and they make the decision. If I am an advocate for one person, then I'm saying, well, that offer that you got, here are what the financial implications of that are. Here's what I would suggest in conjunction with your lawyer, like, hey, consider these other options, or it's a great, option. And so it's really helpful because at the end of the day, people can make more informed decisions. And in any aspect of your life, if you can do that, it's helpful. Because even if you make a mistake, it's like, hey, I didn't make it because I was uninformed or I was just bumbling through. I said, you know what? I'd rather go with this than that. And often has better implications long term.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you came from this scientific world and now you were looking for a way to have more of a direct impact on people. And now you're doing that through your financial planning work as well as your direct divorce work.
Yeah. And I do want to be clear, Cary, for compliance reasons, I have to be really clear that the two practices are separate and unaffiliated. And as a certified financial planning professional, however, I'm held to a standard of giving guidance and advice that is in the client's best interest, not mine. It's another compliance thing. They like you to say certified financial planner professional. It's I sound a little dorky, but it's those are the rules.
Not a problem. I understand that compliance can be very regulated and we want to make sure that there's no issues.
Right. It's there to protect us. So
absolutely. Now, I know I wanted to go back to something you were sharing a moment ago about your work, both as a neutral as well as an advocate.
Sure.
So can you share with our listeners a little bit about those two distinct roles and kind of how you help folks in both of those roles?
Sure, absolutely. So when I'm a neutral, I'm literally not taking sides, In fact, I try to be as transparent as possible about communication with both people. Most of my emails, if you want to say it, would be to both people. And there are no secrets. It's like, hey, I'm giving you information. I'm taking information from you to help analyze the situation and allow the two of you to come to an agreement. So what are the different ways that a financial neutral can work? So in mediation, sometimes a mediator will call me up and say, I'd really like you to work with this couple. It could be on cash flow and budget, because very often one person was more involved in the finances. So even though, maybe one person doesn't need it as much as the other, still, I need to have some conversations to really get to the bottom of okay, what are the numbers, et cetera. All of that can factor into spousal support and all kinds of things. That's not my, area. Most of the time in mediation, people will each have their own attorney to help them review the different options and so on. But my job is to help them with whatever the cash flow, if it's limited scope, maybe it's looking at the full picture and proposing some different scenarios as starting points for them, and then answering any questions that they may have. Could be simple questions like, well, can we divide these retirement accounts? So-and-so has a pension. I don't, like how that type of thing. So lots of factual stuff and number stuff, but also just really saying, well, here are the possibilities. Instead of like 100, let's narrow it down to these. And a lot of times that helps with a good starting point so that both people can say, okay, well, I know what I'm looking at.
In that role, do you ever find that you are kind of helping one of the spouses, as you mentioned before, maybe the one who was not as involved in the finances, just become a bit more educated about what they have and like the mechanics of that? Because they weren't the CFO of the family and they just need more information so that they can then understand it in order to make that decision.
Absolutely. In fact, sometimes I've been sought out by one spouse for the other spouse because, that person is like, I don't want him or her to be like destitute or like, having a really hard time. So can you help with educating them? And I will find that they're just different needs. So I remember just recently I had a meeting as a financial neutral, I had a meeting with one person about their finances, right? And the budget in particular. And what that person needed was completely different than the budget discussion I'm going to be having with their spouse. And it was fascinating because, she's never really handled the finances of the family, but she loves Excel. So looking at some of the spending reports from the credit cards, like, oh, okay, I said, okay, well, you can actually export that into Excel. And then she was like, oh, great, I'll sort this. I'll figure out, like these things. I was like, okay, go to town. And then when she had done that first scrape, then it's for us to sit down and just talk through a few things. Because a lot of times folks don't even think about all those expenses that just are there, especially if you have children. And then that's the other thing as a financial neutral, when there are children involved, a lot of times it makes sense for one person the person who's been more focused on the finances, or at least the finances of the kids, to do the first draft, if you will. And then bring in the other person so that there's not this like, oh my gosh, like you're asking me to talk about stuff that I just don't know. I'm a good parent, but I just never got involved with this stuff before. And as you know, that's super important because that can be used to help calculate like what would child support be and what are the needs of the children, et cetera. Yeah,
absolutely. And I see that need for the education component, even from our mediated clients, right? Because like you mentioned, both spouses want to make sure in a lot of the cases that we're working with that the other one is protected and, that they're not going to be destitute and that they're going to have the resources that they need to care for themselves as well as the kids. But that person can't even have the conversation about the settlement proposal until they understand the underlying finances behind it. So I find that educational component is absolutely critical so that they can then make that informed decision. So I think that is very valuable. And let's now move into your advocacy role, which for those listening is kind of the difference between what I do as a neutral mediator, right? I'm not taking sides. I'm just really facilitating that conversation and helping clients make decisions versus when I'm in my attorney role and we're advocating for a client and like being able to give specific advice and answer legal questions and really help negotiate on their behalf. So can you share a little bit more about how you help people in that advocacy role?
I feel like I'm in Ghost. Ditto. Well, except for the fact, I want to be really clear, I don't give legal advice, right? That's your area.
Right.
But it very much is a situation where you can be biased, if you will, in favor of your client. You're looking at it just from your client's perspective is probably a better way to put it, And so oftentimes it'll be someone who is like, I am not the one either who initiated this divorce or really understood the finances. And here's an offer that I've been given. And I'm like, I have no clue.
Right.
And so then I have to be the bad guy in a way and say, well, I need a whole bunch of information so that I can help you to understand what this offer is. And then also say, is this a legitimate from a financial perspective offer? And or how will that leave you when the ink is dry, right? Because ultimately, that is one of the big things that we're looking at. And granted, I can be an advocate in an amicable situation, even a mediation, but it's just that I am helping one person, okay? But I can also be an advocate in a litigation situation. Not my favorite, because you see a lot of things that, are just not the greatest. Right. However, I would love to hear your perspective on this. I find that amicable doesn't mean kumbaya, and it doesn't mean skipping through fields together, right? I think amicable means that you're saying, hey, we want to be civil. Perhaps we have a family, whether they're grown or not, together, and we want to be able to be at family functions and not, be at each other's throats and so on. Or maybe we just want privacy, that type of thing. So I have been in advocate situations in a mediation. I've been in advocate situations for litigation. And sometimes I've been in situations where I was the first person sought out, for, let's say, advice on an offer. And then it became clear, because I couldn't get enough information from the other person, even though it was a mediation, you're supposed to be transparent, that I had to, in good faith, say, I really would recommend that you talk to an attorney, because this person didn't have an attorney in their mediation as of yet. And I said, it would be good if you talk to an attorney who is settlement minded, but who can represent you if this doesn't go the way it is. Because sometimes you see things where the other person is just not willing to give information, and also clearly is not willing to compromise. And so it's just important to say, okay, this is beyond my scope as a CDFA certified divorce financial analyst. This needs to be in the hand of a legal professional. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with you that when we are referring to amicable, it doesn't necessarily mean everything's kumbaya, right? Yeah. I agree that in many scenarios, it's simply that they do want to reduce costs by not being in.
That was a huge one that I missed. Thank you for pointing that out.
Absolutely. They want to have more control over the timeline, because in litigation, that's kind of outside of their hands. And sometimes litigation can put more time constraints on things and make things move without indefinite deadlines.
Right.
Which is something we do see in negotiation. But ultimately, they want more of a say in the final outcome, I think is the biggest piece. And having an attorney and having a financial advocate doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be litigated. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be more complicated, right? It's hopefully going to streamline the process and help you get to a result faster than some of the alternatives.
Yeah, and I think it does matter, in my opinion, if you have a settlement-minded attorney. So I find that attorneys like yourself who are trained as mediators or are trained in collaborative law tend to be much more settlement-minded, than those who really their go-to is let's attack, No disrespect to litigators, because they serve a purpose, and there are situations that require that. But I would say that in situations like you're describing, where people really want to have that kind of power and it's not in the hands of the court or a judge to decide, that's where, those amicable options really come into play. And I think there's statistics that show that whether it's mediation or collaborative law, et cetera, that afterwards people are more satisfied with the outcome, even if they agreed to something slightly different or radically different, it was their decision. So not 100% of the time, but a lot of times they're more satisfied than with the costly litigation room.
Absolutely. I will say that of those cases where I was involved in litigation, almost no one's happy at the end if they went to trial. I mean, very rarely, even if in a scenario where that person may have, from an outside perspective, been deemed to have, quote unquote, won the case. Oftentimes, they lost so much in the process, they didn't necessarily, quote unquote, win. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's also just fascinating to me. I attended a presentation in one of the collaborative groups that I belong to where they talked about the psychology of revenge. Right. And they played like a podcast and then we discussed it about the psychology of it and how you get these highs. But it can cause you to react or behave so irrationally,
Right.
that you end up like, yeah, you're going for that fix, that high that you might get by sticking it to the other person. And then when the cloud settles and you look at all the carnage and you look at like sometimes that carnage is financial, like, okay, was this worth it?
Right.
Probably not, and it's just not healthy.
Absolutely. I agree. It's kind of being caught up in the moment, right? And that actually dovetails very well into the next question that I had for you, which is that you have described divorce as sometimes putting people into a financial fog where everything feels confusing and overwhelming right when they are trying to make these life-changing financial decisions. What's some things that get lost in that fog, and what's the real cost of someone signing an agreement, right? That when they're in that fog and they aren't making clear financial decisions?
Well, so let's start with one that on the face of it seems completely quote unquote fair, 50-50 division. Okay. I get 50% and she gets 50%, and hey, this looks great. But guess what? The assets are significantly different. This 50%, let's just call it $500,000.
Yep.
This $500,000 has what we would call a low cost basis, like the purchase price for these investments was pretty low. Like maybe it was $50,000. So there's $450,000 worth of gains on that. And guess what? If you're going to access that, you're going to, like, let's say you rebalance it, or you just need to take some money out of it, you're going to pay some taxes. And if you didn't know that, that's very different than the other $500,000 that maybe was in cash, It's just little things like that. It's even understanding the sale of a home and the fact that, like, if you've lived in the home 2 out of the last 5 years, then, and let's say you both did, then that's a $500,000 capital gain exclusion. Again, this is all tax stuff, but oh, okay, well, if my spouse moves out and it's been like 3 or 4 years and now I'm going to sell the house, even though the CDFA told me I couldn't really afford the house before, well, guess what? I only have a $250,000 capital gains exclusion because it's just me, right? And so that in this area, it's easy for a house to be $700,000, $1 million, $2 million. That can make a difference, So I think some things like that. I think also one of the things that gets lost in the fog, I see this particularly with women, is like, well, what does this mean for me in terms of being able to retire? I might have to push out retirement an additional 10 or 20 years. And if we had stopped, I'm not saying that I don't have a magic wand, but sometimes it helps people to know, oh, okay. And it can even help the other person, your quote unquote adversary, because they don't necessarily want you to be suffering financially if there can be a small tweak or change or whatnot. I think also I see people in that financial fog or emotional fog where they're saying, I just want it done. A lot of times women kind of have made that decision in their minds and hearts. And it's like, I could care less. I wasn't in this for the money. Well, guess what? You may not have been in it for the money, but the money can mess you up if you don't take a look at it. And I would say even more importantly, for men and women, if you care about your children and you care about not being more likely to be dependent on them, if you just don't just slow down a little bit and say, okay, what do I need to do? Then it makes all the difference in the world, and not always in a good way, right? So if you just slow down, that's a very positive thing. And yet, I also think I get calls almost every week from people who are like, oh, well, I got divorced like 2 years ago. We did it ourselves. And I found out that he had this or she had that, and, and that wasn't disclosed. And I literally have to say, well, okay, you're going to have to talk to an attorney, but I just want you to know that you're going to have to prove, at least from what I've heard, what I've been told, prove fraud and misrepresentation and so on. And I mean, that's harder to do after, especially years after. And a lot of times, if you had objective parties involved, like, for you, like you had counsel, they're going to go through some level of discovery, right? For myself, I'm not going to give somebody advice without gathering documents. I'm not going to take somebody's word for it, right? I'm going to say, hey, I need to see the documents. And if I know that you were a federal worker or he was a federal worker, then I'm going to say, oh, well, there's a pension probably. So let's look at that. Let's look at this. It's all about asking questions. And yes, people can always lie and they can always do things. But I will say if you have professionals involved, they tend to follow some kind of protocol, and that is helpful. And if you have an experienced mediator like you, Cary, I actually met you when you were like a guest speaker in mediation training. I was like, and being held up as like one of the foremost mediators in terms of knowledge and competence, et cetera. You know, it's just important to be working with professionals, even if they're neutrals, right? Who know how things are supposed to be done.
Right. And like you said, it's very difficult to undo if something wasn't disclosed. A lot of times you can have language that's kind of protective in an agreement that says, like, if something's found later, then it's going to be, shared. But, once you've gotten to the divorce hearing and you've waived your right to other assets, then you can't necessarily come back to court and ask for that to be done. So it is important to have someone to ask those questions and make sure that you understand all of the things that really are out there. Absolutely.
I also think that people don't always know what to do right before and even right after the divorce. I've seen situations where years later, they have not got their half of a $2 million retirement account, and it's just like, what happened here? But again, that fog, that I don't even want to call it an icky feeling. Some people really just are traumatized by their divorce, right? And for them, it feels bad even having to revisit any aspect of it. But again, getting professionals involved is helpful because they can say, well, okay, let's do this, then let's do this, and kind of keep you on track. It may be a slow track because if that's what you need, that's what you need, but it's better than not dealing with things. And also, I mean, in situations I've seen where it's far after, it's also harder. And there's certain things that are not as enforceable, especially if you were the one who was supposed to do certain things. You might not get interest that you were supposed to get. You might just get that amount. And like you lost out on all this different interest and stuff. So I think that's another thing. Beneficiary changes. Lots of people have great relationships with their exes, but most are not saying, hey, I want you to get, this money if I pass, or power of attorney. Like you're going to make the decisions about my health if I become incapacitated. Not necessarily the best setup, so.
Right. Yeah. I could speak about those all day long, every day. Update your beneficiary designations because they override your estate plan. Get your estate plan up to date. And that includes those power of attorney. So it is something, like you just said, even though that is a service that our office offers clients, and especially our, divorcing clients, number one, it's one of those things that people just don't want to face the reality of their mortality and having to put those documents in place to begin with. But it's, I think, even more challenging after the divorce because it's like, I just did all of this and now you want me to do another step, right? And I think it is just so difficult to get people to make those necessary changes until, unfortunately, sometimes it's just too late.
Absolutely. I mean, and something like insurance too, I think is important. And who owns the insurance, right? Yep. Because I mean, again, if you're not on the best of terms, you're civil, but not on the best of terms, you still, you may need to own the policy on your ex's life, right? So that the premium gets paid and all that kind of stuff. But what are some reasons that you might need to look at that? Well, if that person was the breadwinner and they're also the person paying more child support or paying child support and they die or become incapacitated, like, is there life insurance in place? Was there disability insurance? Not things that most people think about when they're just like, I just want to get her done. I just want to get out and so on. But the truth is that you can be kind of interwoven in a more uncomfortable way or be completely devastated when it's like, okay, I did not want to be married to this person. I did not want them to die, but they did. And guess what? We can't I can't do what needs to be done for the kids because we didn't think about that. right?
Yeah.
Stuff does happen, but it's not always good stuff. And I mean, I've seen crazy scenarios where people, are divorced and paperwork wasn't filed properly to divide up certain things. And then one person drops down dead. And it's like, oh my gosh, well, what can you do now? It's like an even bigger mess. You may not even get anything,
Yeah. And things that happen, like you said, people just don't think about. And it is important to tie up all of those loose ends once the divorce is final, even though it's going to take some extra time to get those things done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to some extent, it's kind of like therapy, right? Again, I'm not a therapist. I think that's great work, but it's not my work. However, I do think that sometimes I'm sure it's not like, oh, let's go to therapy. It's fun. But sometimes you need to do that work,
right,
to move to the next thing. And, life transitions are like that. You have to, especially something like divorce. It's like, okay, I got to go. Yes, it's a pain. Got to do this, got to update that, But at some point, if you've done those things, you can rest at least with respect to that,
Yeah, 100%. Well, Michelle, this has been such a valuable conversation. There are several other topics that were on my list. And so you'll just have to come back as a guest another time so we can get to all of them.
I would love it. I would love it. I could talk to you all day long.
Can you please share with our listeners how they can find out more about you and your services that you offer?
One of the easiest ways is to visit LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Michelle Vincent Muhammed, Muhammed, because there are a million spellings of my last name. And then in the event of wanting information about guidance through the finances of divorce during or before the divorce, that would be thenextchapterdivorce.com. And again, completely separate and unaffiliated. It's a post-divorce situation or a general financial planning, wealth management situation. That would be mmwealthadvisory.com.
Wonderful. And we'll be sure to include those in the show notes. And as always, if you need guidance or mediation support, be sure to check out our website, which is jacobsonfamilylaw.com. And if this episode resonated with you or you think someone in your circle could benefit from it, please be sure to share. Until next time, stay informed and stay drama-free.
Thanks for listening to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast. If you found today's episode helpful, be sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. For more resources or to work with us, visit jacobsonfamilylaw.com. Until next time, stay grounded, stay informed, and stay drama-free.